Good morning, guys. Welcome back. We are finally going to jump back into some science, which is why you see virtual Mr. Summers here finally doing some science again after taking a little bit of time off and getting back into in-person and virtual school. So it is Rocktober, not October, Rocktober 19th. We're going to be looking at how energy affects rocks, and we're also going to be reviewing a little bit of what we were doing before we took our little break from our science content. So just a reminder, our Module 2 question, that big question we're trying to answer by the end of this whole unit is why are rock samples from the Great Plains and from the Rocky Mountains composed of such similar minerals when they look so different and come from different areas? You can think back to that video we watched in the beginning of our Module 2 with the students in a class that all had different rock samples and figured out that their rock samples, even though they got them from hundreds of miles apart and they look nothing alike, actually were made of all of the same minerals. So that is why we're trying to answer that question. In Chapter 1, we asked, how did the rock of the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains form? And by doing that, we figured out that rocks that form in different ways are different types of rocks. And I'm going to go a little bit more into that in our review in just a minute, where we look at what actually is causing a sedimentary rock versus an igneous rock. What are the ways they're forming? How does that decide which type of rock it is? We also looked at some samples of sedimentary versus igneous rock, and we saw that they had different characteristics or different features. And when we saw those different features, they were kind of clues or hints as to what type of rock that might be and how that rock actually formed. In Chapter 2, we started to ask, where did the magma and the sediment that formed the rock of the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains come from? Because we figured out earlier that in order to form igneous rock, we need magma. In order to form sedimentary rock, we need sediment. So where did that material actually come from, especially if it's made of the same minerals? And so far, we've seen that the material from one rock formation can be weathered or melted and make a new rock formation. So it's not a whole different rock forming. It could actually be using the same exact materials and just changing into a different type of rock, which is why this whole module that we're doing right now is called rock transformations, because transformation means to actually change. Now, we're going to review a little bit. And in order to review, we're going to look back at our simulation that you guys have used a little bit already. One thing I want you to remember, because it's been a little while, is to look for vocab words as I go through the simulation. Any vocab word that I'm going to expect you to use today in your work or in your writing, I'll try and give you a quick definition of what that means as I use it in the simulation. But you might want to every once in a while just pause and take notes on those vocab words so you know what they mean, because they'll be really important later on today. So I'm going to open up my simulation in Amplify. We've used this a couple of times already, and we'll actually look at it a little bit more tomorrow and use that analyze rock part. And when I open it up on the right side, I'm going to have my different processes that I could have and the types of energy that are actually helping to form those processes. So my energy source for weathering is going to be from the sun. My energy source for melting and moving or cooling magma and moving plates all comes from Earth's interior. So there are two different places where this energy comes from, the sun and down inside the Earth. So I'm going to look at this one up here first. Now, weathering, first vocab word, means the breaking of rocks. And if I click on this button, I'm going to go ahead and make my weathering happen up here. And I can see that it is the actual rain or water is weathering those rocks, and it is causing it to flow downhill. And it's forming those sediments. All of these little pieces, another vocab word, are sediments. So sediments are small pieces of rock. Once those sediments layer up underneath the water, the pressure of the water and of things on top of it, like the weight of the sediments, cause it to go through compaction and cementation. And you saw that up here. Compaction is the squeezing down of those sediments, and cementation is like the gluing together or the sticking together of those sediments. And that's what actually forms one solid type of rock, and that would be sedimentary rock. So if I take a peek down here, the pink right here is sedimentary rock. And that is going to be made of small, round, very like sand-sized grains because of the compacting and cementation. So far we've looked at weathering, which is the breaking. Erosion is the moving. Sediments are those tiny pieces of rocks. And then the compaction and cementation is the squeezing down and sticking together, which actually forms sedimentary rock. And all of the energy that forms sedimentary rock comes from the sun. Now, if we look down inside our actual Earth's interior, the Earth's interior gets really, really hot. So you have some solid rock here that is actually going to melt. And when it melts, it creates magma, which is what you have right here. This is magma. Magma is just liquid melted rock. So rock that's gotten so hot, it has actually turned into like a really thick, hot liquid. It usually glows red because of how hot it actually is. Now, once magma reaches the surface, it's lava. It is the same thing, it's just melted rock, only we call it lava if it's reached the surface. That magma can cool off. So if that magma starts to rise up before, and I'll just make it go at the surface, if that magma rises up before school announcement, if that magma rises up because of its heat, it's going to go towards the top of the surface of the Earth and come out the surface. And what you just saw happen there is basically a volcano forming. Once that magma reaches the surface, it cools off. And when it cools off, it forms a new type of rock, and that would be igneous rock. So this rock here, rhyolite, is actually an example of igneous rock, and it might have little holes in it or have like really sharp edges. And that forms from the magma cooling off at the surface of the Earth. So sedimentary rock is formed from energy from the sun, weathering an area, breaking down those rocks, forming sediments that are going to compact and cement together to form sedimentary rock. That energy is all coming from the sun. And then igneous rock is going to be from energy from Earth's interior, causing rock to actually melt into magma or liquid rock, and then causing that actual magma to cool off and form igneous rock. So that is what we've talked about so far. We've looked at this this simulation. We've talked about where the energy comes from, and we've looked at the different processes that form those. Today, we're just going to be doing a little practicing, actually writing how rock can change from one form to another, and how the energy, either from the sun or from the Earth's interior, actually affects these types of rocks. What you're going to do next for the rest of your do first is just a really quick kind of like matching. You're going to look at a couple of sets of cards that have a picture and a really quick description underneath it. And you're going to tell me if those cards would be something that forms sedimentary rock or something that forms igneous rock. It should only take you a few minutes. And then once you are done with that, you're actually going to pause there, and you'll continue in live class with either myself in person or Mr. Love if you are in a virtual live class. And from there, you'll go ahead and do some more investigating and a little bit of writing about how rock can change from one form to another. Once you are done, you can pause, and I will see you, or Mr. Love will see you in live class.